Everybody, this is Steven. I'm back once more to continue talking about the superhero squad Marvel figurines. This time I'm going to cover Thor and the Asgardians, or whatever few that were produced. I believe I am lacking some versions of Thor, but what you see is what I have. There's a couple of versions of Thor here, about 4 different ones, and then we have Hercules, the all-seeing father Odin, Thor's half-brother Loki, and Enchantress, lady who is taking a romantic interest in Thor, but since Thor always rejects her on behalf of Lady Sif, she then assists Loki in causing mischief and causing problems. And of course, I'm going to start talking about this big guy right here. This is a frost giant, from where Loki comes from. So Loki every now and then employs the frost giants because he has a frost giant blood, and Loki is supposed to be a son of Ymir, the leader of the frost giants. And since he has a means of controlling the frost giants, then he's always using them in his schemes against Thor and Odin. So this is the only particular version of frost giant made, and he actually looks pretty good. He looks like he stepped right out of the comics, and of course this is very different from the frost giants you would see in the Thor movie, in the very first movie. This is more or less how they look in the comics. So this frost giant, I believe, would represent Ymir, the leader of the frost giants, who is in charge of them. He's carrying, there is some scuffs from too many years of keeping him. He has an ice battle axe that he's gripping in one hand, and an ice club that he's holding in the other. None of the weapons are removable. And this figure is about roughly 5.5 or around 6 inches tall, more or less like your typical action figure. He does have articulation, so he can move his arm all the way up, but not all the way around, due to the his hair that was sculpted all the way to the back. The other arm cannot go up at all, except a little bit, this time because of the hair as well, but also because of the large horns on his helmet. They're blocking the further movement. Now there is also no wrist articulation, so well, at least not in the hand, not in the right hand where he's holding the axe, but in the left hand where he's holding the club, yes, there is. So he can rotate his wrist 360 degrees. And as I mentioned in my previous video, none of these figures, small or large or regular size ones, none of them came with any articulation in their legs. So he's looking like he's squatting a bit, or crouching slightly. There is a great deal of detail on his armor. He has a golden chainmail of a sort. He has golden rings all around his beard, and he also has golden rings dividing the locks of his hair. And he has some shoulder pads that are molded on with ice spikes on them. Very large, prominent horns on his helmet, and the helmet is also in a golden color. The helmet is not removable. And he's wearing the Viking boots, except for one of them that you can see his toes, so it's not covered all the way, while the other one is. And this is the size comparison between a frost giant and Loki. So he's roughly about up to the waistline of the frost giant, but of course still much smaller in size. So this would be the frost giant, one of the few very large figures that was released in the superhero squad. There was a few more, So over here now we have Loki, the god of mischief, and the half-brother of Thor. Loki always felt that he was not really accepted, at least according to the Thor movies, that he was not really ever accepted entirely into Asgard. So he would always be there, and also in the Viking mythology, he's always there to cause trouble, cause mischief at any cost. Except in the comics, he would be much more aggressive and much more cunning and ambitious, because he would always try to overthrow Thor and bring about Ragnarok, which was not the case in the movie version. So I prefer the comic book version, at least from the old comics, and I'm talking about predominantly the ones from the 70s and 80s time period. So he would be quite a menace and quite a force to reckon with. He's always using trolls and frost giants and other creatures to do his bidding and to wage war against Asgard. Here he comes molded with a golden cape, and he has also golden horns. Most of his costume is covered in gold. The cape is not removable. It's made of soft plastic. There is some waist movement, but very minor, and it's being blocked because of the cape that's right behind him. The arms can move up and down, but also with some limitation due to the shoulder plates that he has on both sides. And the head has this prolonged decoration of the helmet that goes all the way down to the back. He can move the head left and right, but not all the way, because of this piece here that's blocking the further movement of the head. So that would be Loki. Then you have Odin, the all-seeing father Odin, an equivalent of Zeus in Greek mythology, and he has also an elaborate helmet with huge horns. He has an eye patch and a beard, and he's wielding his sword that he carries in battle. He has what seems to be a polar bear cape, because there is a sort of a head shaped over here, and he has this powerful trident. No, not like Aquaman's trident, and this is different. This is the one that Odin carries, and that contains all the power of Asgard that only he can wield, even though Loki has tried numerous times to steal this and use it to his own advantage. Of course, no articulation in the usual places, and also unfortunately no articulation in the wrists either, and none in the neck, but the arms can go about that much up and down again. So he's very static. The weapons cannot be removed, they're molded into his hands, but he still looks like a pretty good figure. And this more looks like just a decoration on the cape, just molded on to make his cape a little bit looking more out of the ordinary. And he's wearing also an armor and the Viking boots. Now, the only female figurine that I know of that seems to be part of the Asgard of the superhero squad is the Enchantress here. I do not believe they made Hela, the goddess of the underworld, and they did not make the Valkyrie or any of the other ones, not to my knowledge. If any of you have seen these figurines, you can let me know down in the comments. So this is Enchantress. She has romantic interest, at least in the comics, toward Thor, but she's constantly being rejected because Thor prefers Lady Sif. And down on Earth, or Midgard, where he goes very often, he has also made an acquaintance of one Jane Foster, a medical nurse. So there is no space for him, when he has no feelings for Enchantress, to even entertain her approaches. Because of it, Enchantress here decides to exact her revenge on him and hurt him every chance she gets by assisting his enemies, such as Loki. Now, of course, in the cartoon version, her characteristics were a bit softened up because, after all, she's a character for a children's cartoon. But in the comics, she's a much more formidable enemy, beautiful and dangerous at the same time. And she has a big command of magic at her disposal. She has her own personal bodyguard, which I don't believe made it into this storyline either. He carries a giant axe, and he is a silent bodyguard of hers that follows her everywhere she goes. Now, that character did appear in the Thor Ragnarok, except for a while he did carry an axe, and then he switched to some kind of M16 machine guns that he recovered from Midgard. So anyway, more about her then. She's pretty much sculpted as one piece, with literally no articulation of any kind, neither in the waist. So most of the females in this storyline were sort of made this way, that they're just in a pose of releasing magic, I guess, from their hands. Not much other than that, and they cannot really move their arms up and down, because some of the ladies from Marvel usually rely on their powers that come out of their hands, except for a few that would use fists and so forth. So she's made as only as one piece. Now, we'll take a look at Hercules, who is the son of Zeus, and in the Marvel comics, the Zeus and Odin know each other very well, and the people of Olympus and Asgard also, the gods and demigods and so forth, and they all know each other very well. So this is the only Olympian that was made, and that's Hercules. This is how he looks in Marvel Comics and in the cartoon. Of course, he's made to look a bit milder rather than angry, and he's just showing off, posing for his enemies and fans. He has also no articulation. One of his feet is resting on a rock. He has a little letter H engraved on his belt, and he has the typical look of Hercules, the way he's always imagined, with a beard and mustache. He has a covering for his head, or it's not really a circlet, it's more like a semi-helmet of a sort, and the other arm is just outstretched, and he's just showing off, I guess, the way he's posing. It looks like he's just showing off his muscles to impress everyone. It's a pity he has no articulation, because this is the only way you can really pose him. Anyway, the next figure would be Thor. Now we finally come to him. There is 4 versions that I have, and I'm not sure it's that all the versions of him released. So I ended up with 4 different ones. This is the classic version of Thor, the kind of costume he wore from the first appearance, and the costume that he's most known for. He does not wear this kind of costume in the movies. The one in the movies is more modern, and from from the Marvel comics, called the Ultimate Avengers. So this one is the classic one, or you could even call it first appearance. In his case here, he's actually standing rather than crouching in his legs, so he looks taller than any of the crouched figurines. He looks a bit taller, you can see that already. Beside him and this more modern looking Hulk, he's much taller, because for once they're not making him crouch. He's actually standing with his legs up, with his legs straight. So he does have articulation. He can move a bit in the waist. Again, the problem is the cape, which is molded on, so he cannot move all the way. Then he can even raise his hammer to strike the enemy or to call on a thunder. And he can also raise his other arm, and it's kind of pre-posed in a strange pose. It's just sort of like he's clutching something, or he's about to grab someone by the neck. And the head is also molded on, the helmet is molded on, so there is no movement in the head. The next one would be a modern Hulk. Again, not exactly the version you see in the movie. because most of these figurines came before the movie, before the first Thor movie. So Thor here is wearing a more modern chainmail armor that he wore in the later comics. He has his Mjolnir hammer molded into his hand. He doesn't have any articulation whatsoever except the arms. Can go up and down, nothing in the wrists, and the head is also just molded on, and including the shoulders, waistline, also nothing. But he looks good because at least he looks impressive. He can also raise his hammer, and that's the main point, that he can pose with it. Now this is one of the very first Thor figurines from the Marvel Superhero Squad. He's not the best one out of all of these, but at least it was a decent attempt for the times. He has, again, no articulation in the waistline. The head cannot turn. He has a molded little tiny red cape. Later capes would be longer and bigger than this. Now he has the strange articulation in the shoulder that he can just rotate his arm literally rather than placing it down. So he can sort of rotate it sideways. No articulation in the wrist, and the hammer is a lot smaller than how it would look later on in the figurines, and you can even compare it to a figurine, to a hammer that came later on. You can see that at first it was too small, and then it will become a lot larger in later waves. And of course, one of the hands is also in a sort of a semi-silly position. He's just pointing at someone, like going, I'm assuming like he's pointing at Loki, ready to smash him with the hammer. So it's still an okay figurine, and wearing his classic costume, or at least something that would resemble his classic costume, because the colors are wrong. But other than that, it was a decent attempt for the first try. Now the final figurine is another version of Thor in the chainmail, except with an addition, slightly different head mold. He still has long blonde hair there, and he can raise his arms. The head is static. Well, there is a little bit of articulation, very limited in the waistline, as you can see, again because of the cape that's molded straight at the back. And the costume is pretty much the same as the previous one, with some minor differences. As I said, the head is different, and the different color of the hammer, the Mjolnir. But the other thing that's different compared to other Thors, this one has a special effect molded on to the hammer as he's swinging his hammer. So you can sort of emulate the idea when he's swinging the hammer ready to use it. And he's has it molded onto his hand so that it looks like he's spinning it and ready to throw it. So another solid version of Thor, pretty good and close enough to the modern costumes, or at least exactly the same as some of the more modern costumes of Thor. Again, it's all chainmail. So anyway, that's the second part of Marvel Superhero Squad, and today we covered the Asgardians and one of the Olympians. So there will be more videos on the topic of Marvel Superhero Squad figurines coming next in the future. So stay tuned and catch you guys next time. Thanks, bye.